Welcome everyone. Before we kick off, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land from which we are presenting today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. We at Arctic Fox are really pleased and very excited to be with you today for the launch of the Digital Marketing and eCommerce in Focus report. For those that don't know me, I'm Teresa Spurdy, the founder and director of Arctic Fox. And this is the fourth year we have published this report, and we're doing so in conjunction with Six Degrees Executive. And I personally believe this is by far our best one yet. Before I hand over to our host today, I have a few thank yous that I'd like to make before we start digging into all of the findings. So firstly, I want to take the opportunity to thank all of the 250 participants from this year's study. Without your input, we simply couldn't bring this report to market today. Also, a very big thank you to our major sponsor, Amperity. We are very, very grateful for your support over the past 2 years. Amperity is a leading customer data platform provider that helps brands confidently use data to improve marketing performance, build long-term customer loyalty, and drive growth. Today, Billy Louisu, the Area Vice President for APAC at Amperity, is with us to host today's session. I also want to take the opportunity to say a big thanks to our silver sponsor, SKU Vantage Salsify, who have sponsored the e-commerce section of the report this year. They are global leaders in product information management and also support content syndication. All right, so that's enough from me for the moment. I'm going to hand over to Billy to take over as the host of this session. Welcome, Billy.
Thank you, Teresa. Hello, everyone. Another year of brilliant insights by Arctic Fox and 6 Degrees. So in today's session, our expert panel of speakers will step through 6 of the key themes surfaced throughout this year's study. These will include a deep dive into CX's importance and brand maturity in the space, a closer look at personalisation, which is, of course, a core part of CX, latest insights in and around marTech, data and digital transformation. We'll zoom in on all things genAI adoption, unpack what is occurring on the talent development front, including a closer look at working from home trends, and we'll round out the session with a closer look at e-commerce. During today's session, we have a number of panelists who will share their wisdom and insights from the study, and these include Teresa Spurdy, who you just met, the talented duo of Joe Kraus and Maya Wettenhorf from 6 Degrees, and special guest appearances from Dina Coleman, the Group General Manager, Marketing and Digital Accent Group, and Ryan Clark, Chief Digital Officer at L'Oreal. It'll truly be an hour of power, so buckle up and hope you enjoy the session. Before we start unpacking the findings, I want to highlight the methodology for the report. So research was conducted from January to March 2024 via a survey encompassing 66 questions. Over 250 leaders took part across the country. Responses came from a cross-section of industries, and we had a good spread of responses from organisations of various sizes. This means the report's findings don't just reflect enterprise organisations, it's organisations of all sizes. As we move through today's studies and findings, we do suggest that you pop any questions below in the Q&A for any of today's speakers, and we expect to be able to cover off some of these towards the end of our discussion. I'm going to pick a few that stick out. All right, let's jump into theme 1, and I'm going to introduce Teresa and Joe back to the spotlight, please. Okay, first cab off the rank, let's take a look at CX, the importance of it in brands' capability in the space. Teresa, what has the study uncovered?
Great starting point, Billy. So CX obviously isn't new, but we believe that given the tougher trading conditions and intensifying competition, that brands are placing greater emphasis on it than ever before. So as a result, this year we decided that we would tease out the strategic importance of strategies like CX to understand how critical it is to Australian brands' digital and marketing strategy. So what is it that we've actually found from the study this year? 87% of leaders ranked CX as strategically important to their overall marketing and digital strategy over the next kind of 12 to 24 months. So it's by far the majority are really prioritising it and saying that it is of critical importance. But to differentiate, of course, brands need to go just beyond creating frictionless experiences and really focusing on how to wow their customers. Whilst B2B and B2C brands both see CX as highly important, what is interesting from this year's study is that we've seen that B2B brands are placing less importance on CX than B2C. And for those that are serving B2B markets, we need to understand that really at its core, the B2B buyer experience expectation is really shaped by that buyer's personal interactions with brands. And that really means that B2B experience management is just as important as it is in the B2C space. As part of the study, we also unpacked capability maturity in the CX space. And what the study revealed is that 40% of brands believe that their capability actually lags the market. And for B2B brands specifically, that jumps to 52% of brands feeling that their CX capability really lags the market. So whilst we're seeing CX is high on the agenda, what is going to happen is many brands are going to be trying to implement strategies whilst also building the capability at the same time, which is always a challenge for brands to grapple with.
Yeah, super interesting, T. In particular, the difference between the B2B and B2C. So one of the things we see when it comes to CX is that often it isn't clear cut as to where it should reside structurally within an organization. So Jo, what are your views on this?
Thanks, Billy. It's interesting because it's actually one of the most common questions we have been getting from our clients. And the answer is that CX can reside in a few areas. Sometimes it sits in marketing, sometimes it sits within a digital team, and sometimes it sits in a dedicated CX or customer team as a standalone business unit. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It really does depend on the industry, product or service, and what the definition of CX is within that business and where they are in their journey. The thing we all need to remember about CX, though, is that it should be federated. Yes, you need a champion and a driver, but all parts of the organization contribute to delivering a great customer experience, which is why CX programs need to be organizational-wide initiatives. Resources need to be centered around areas that drive the most significant improvements in the experience for the customer and obviously the most commercial gains for the business. So Billy, I know that you work with a lot of clients across this space. What have you been seeing?
Yeah, good question. Look, I think the key thing I've been seeing as a CX practitioner is it really depends on how you measure CX, and it varies. If you look at it at banking, it's traditionally metric is NPS, right, which sits within customer service. For software, it's CSAT, which sits within customer success. And for retail, it's customer lifetime value. So it differs, right? But when I did work with one of the top 4 banks, I found that they really embraced human-centered design and tried to infuse all their product lines with customer centricity at the heart to drive adoption. So it varies. But yeah, good point.
Similar.
All right, let's move on to theme 2. We're going to talk to personalization. So both Teresa and Jo for this one as well. Thank you. So personalization and CX are bedfellows. To deliver on customer expectations, we have to think about the role of personalization. What can we glean from the study, Teresa?
Sure. So I'm not going to start with the study findings. I'm going to start by taking a bit of a quick look back at history. So when we think about personalization, Amazon really put personalization on the map, offering recommendations based on browsing behavior. And that occurred way back in 2003. It doesn't feel that long ago, but it's now 30 years ago. And really the industry has been focused on it ever since. So where are we now? The studies revealed that nearly 3 in 4 leaders believe that personalization is strategically important over the next 12 to 24 months. So it's not as high as CX, but it's still very strong in terms of strategic importance. But nearly 6 in 10 leaders believe that their capability in the personalization space lags the market, which is huge when you think about the fact that, this is not a new concept. And so why is that the case? Why are brands lagging from a capability perspective? The study has pointed to a few things. So the first is that the biggest skill gap in digital and marketing teams across the country once again was data and analytics. That is not new news. That has been in the top spot for the last 4 years that we've been running the report. A lack of knowledge and awareness of how to leverage the data and data concepts will naturally impact your brand's ability to build capability. All right, so that's the first thing. The second is that the study has found that less than 1 in 5 brands have a unified view of the customer. 1 in 5. So there's lots of talk about this unification, but as data has exploded, we have more sources than ever. We are struggling to unify it, which is an incredibly important foundation. And thirdly, marTech utilization levels are low. And I'm going to talk about more about this shortly. But many brands are still really grappling with how to effectively use the tech in order to power personalisation. So all of these factors and more really impact the build of personalisation capability.
Yeah, super interesting around the skills gap. I think that's
Absolutely. And
3 years
I
running.
think the other thing I would mention, Billy, is that, what we've also seen in market and what's apparent from many of our client engagements is that personalization is often still occurring in silos. And this really does hamper the ability to build maturity and realize the ambition from a personalization perspective. So it feels like, yes, we've made some progress, but many brands are telling us that they're not where they want to be, and we've got a long way to go as it pertains to personalization.
Great summary. So so I'm interested next in your perspective, Joe, and how you are seeing teams resourced around personalization, because this does impact capability build.
Yeah, thanks, Billy. Look, I think in the past, personalization was primarily the domain of data, loyalty, and CRM roles, and then obviously moved across the e-commerce landscape. Now, every channel can be personalized in some way, and this is actually what customers expect. A report from McKinsey and Company highlighted the significance of the consumer shift, with 71% of customers now expecting personalized interactions, and 76% of those feeling really frustrated when it's lacking. So it's no surprise to me that 72% of organizations from this study have personalization on their radar. And, given this shift, we suspect the demand for talent will surge. And consulting firms and overseas markets could become great hunting grounds to find experienced talent with personalization skills, similar to the digital boom we experienced 10 years ago when organizations bought kind of digital teams in-house. Probably the thing that we've seen a little bit over the last couple of years is dedicated personalization lead or product manager roles that drive personalization across one or more channels. Structurally, again, they can sit in a few different areas, marketing, digital, e-commerce teams, or, often in a more holistic CX or experience teams as well. And as sort of Teresa said, earlier, having the right data, talent, technology, and tools will be key. But again, organizations need to have a really cohesive teams that work together holistically across the entire business to bring these personalization experiences to life, because it's within everyone's department.
Yeah. So if I'm an international listener, get your visas ready. Australia's hiring.
Yeah.
John said it.
Thanks.
So now let's jump into theme 3 around marTech. So T, you pointed out some foundational aspects to build capability for personalization, which leads us on to talk about topics like marTech, data, and digital transformation. It's a big bucket for us to unpack. Where do we start?
It is a big bucket. Start by making sure you read the full report afterwards. But let me start with talking about digital transformation. So some people would be very surprised to hear that there is actually a really big cohort of organizations that have really only just begun embarking on digital transformation. So from a study perspective, essentially what we found is 7 in 10 brands stated that they're undergoing some level of digital transformation. And nearly half of those have been undergoing that digital transformation for 18 months or less. So that's the first key finding from the study. Yes, it's still a major focus for organizations, but there's a number of organizations that have just started embarking on it. Before seeing the findings, I had a bit of a hypothesis around some of the industries that tend to be kind of later to the party on the transformation front. But what was interesting when I saw the results was that the hypothesis turned out to be wrong.
Which ones could they be, T?
Well, Billy, I'm actually probably going to ask you that question. Which ones do you think they might be? Let's see what your hypothesis
Thank you for putting me on the spot. Look, having worked in the loyalty space prior to the data space, I'd say traditionally it was the direct-to-consumer brands. So the consumer brands who are trying to build a D2C proposition.
So here is the interesting insight. There's actually a real mix of organisations across every category that are in the early stages of transformation. There wasn't really a trend that demonstrated that certain industries were earlier in transformation and some were in kind of, more mature stages. My hypothesis was that services-based businesses and SaaS were ahead and CPG and manufacturing potentially lagging, but simply not true. So that's the first finding. The other really big finding on the digital transformation front was related to executive alignment around priorities. So when we asked leaders whether or not they agreed or disagreed that their executive team are aligned on digital transformation priorities, nearly half, so 47%, agreed that there's a lack of alignment. And so here's the thing. If teams aren't aligned around common priorities, for digital transformation, what we normally see is teams pulling in different directions, teams going head to head to gain support and focus from other teams to help them deliver on their initiatives. And really a whole host of problems emerge. And it basically de-accelerates your ability to deliver on that ambition from a digital transformation point of view. And so what that means is leaders do need to work really, really hard to drive alignment if they are to accelerate digital efforts for digital transformation. The strategy is not enough.
Wow. Well, so you can't talk about transformation without talking about tech investment. So what is occurring on the marTech investment front?
Yeah, so again, so much to explore here. It's a big part of the study every year. But this year what we did was we took a closer look at marTech utilisation, and we did that for a few reasons. Globally, there has been a number of reports really pointing to a downward trend of marTech utilisation use in recent years. And there's also a really strong focus on marTech stack consolidation, which is why we really wanted to test this utilisation piece in the local market. So what we found is that less than 1 in 5 leaders, so less than 1 in 5, I'm going to reinforce that, believe that their marTech utilisation is semi-strong or strong. So more than 80% believe that they have average, low, or very, very low utilisation. And we are spending a lot of money on this as an industry, so that should create a few alarm bells for people. So why is this occurring? There's a few causes. The first really is a stack creep issue, right? Which is I buy a few platforms, the provider's product roadmaps evolve, and I end up with a whole lot of features and functionality that I already have in another platform or that I simply don't need, even when I procure that platform. And the second is more around gaps in skills and capability of team members. So marTech strategy and implementation was identified as the third biggest skill gap across the country within teams. That's been like that for the second year running. So of course we have a gap in our ability to effectively utilise the tech. But Billy, you work in this space every single day, so keen to hear from you. What were the most interesting insights that you took out of the study?
So I read it front to cover, T, if you're wondering. So I'm personally surprised. I'm personally surprised CRM and marketing automation are still 1 and 2 in tech investment. Good to see CDPs are getting some love, and it's the 3rd spot. In particular, the 2 highlights of improving data literacy and data quality were so high up in regard. So if those as high priorities, CDPs, in my opinion, are a fuel to improving both growth and retention. So that was my insight. All right, so we have our first guest speaker. So we're now going to explore some of these findings and challenges from one of our guest speakers. So Dina, welcome to the virtual couch. So Dina, as mentioned earlier, is the Group General Manager, Digital and Marketing at Accent Group. And we're excited she could join us today to share some of her wisdom in digital transformation in the marTech space. So Dina, we know Accent is in the midst of transforming, building out their marTech stack and looking at better ways to activate customer data. They're really keen to get your firsthand experience here. So firstly, how are you tackling the challenge of unifying your customer data at Accent Group, and what have you learned along the journey so far?
So it's really to what Joe said. Well, actually, firstly, thank you for having me. I should probably jump back a step, but I was listening to what Joe said intently, because that definitely resonates with us because customers expect personalisation, as an example, to be a priority. But how can you personalise if you don't have that true view of customer? And for us at Accent Group, we have a long-standing commitment to our customer and prioritising the customer, whether it's coming to one of our 860 stores, whether it's coming to one of our 32 websites, whether it's engaging with our CX team. So for us, being able to get a true view of what the customer is doing is key. And as we've been reviewing our strategic business goals and how we're going to get growth over the years, for us, it's then been looking at, okay, have we got the right technology and have we got the right data foundations? And for us, we've sort of taken a step back right to the beginning to go, we need to get that data foundation right, get the customer view right, and make sure that it's really clear across the business and within the brands, because we are a complex business, to kind of get to that point. So bringing on our new customer data platform and getting that at the crux of everything we do to then build everything out around it is very important for us.
Yeah, sheer scale, 800 stores, 30 plus websites. I mean, it's not many that have to deal with that, but you've got a huge asset that you're going to start utilizing. So driving digital transformation can be tough for leaders. It requires you to manage up and across the organization. What would be your advice to leaders to better educate the executives on priorities and how to garner appropriate investment?
So I always take the approach of what is keeping executives up at night, or really anyone that I need to, I guess, bring along on a journey. And once you can kind of hone in on that point, if you can then align to what you're doing from a digital transformation point of view and how that will help them, which is likely going to be things, for us, it's how am I going to get my comps, how am I going to hit my EBIT numbers? And a lot of what we're doing is, in around the customer and helping improve those experiences. So naturally that is going to tie in. So bringing that to those points and also removing, I hate to say it's pretty simple in that, removing the tech jargon, because sometimes if you overcomplicate it in that space, you lose people along the way. So that education, the alignment with what they're trying to do, and bringing along on the journey. As we explored bringing in that new customer data platform for us, that journey piece was really key, and bringing the right stakeholders into the process and having them feel that they've been involved in the use cases to deliver the technology that we need.
Yeah, your CFO with his hands in his head going, another acronym I don't understand.
Yeah, pretty much.
Tell me why I need it. Yeah, thank you, Dee. Thanks for sharing your thoughts and being part of our launch today.
No worries, thank you.
Cheers. All right, theme 4, I want to welcome Teresa and Joe back, please. The meaty topic of the industry disruptor genAI. So we could not talk about genAI. Everyone's talking about it, right? And the findings from this year's study were pretty paramount and insightful. So given it's fast on the rise to fame over the past few years, what are we seeing in the market in terms of adoption by brands, Teresa?
Sure. So before I kick off, I want to give everyone a gentle reminder. Please pop your burning questions into the Q&A so we can answer them hopefully fairly shortly now. But on to genAI, and back to your question, Billy, sorry. There is no doubt that genAI is going to fundamentally reshape our industry. You'd have to be potentially living under a rock not to know that now. But in April this year, Jack Myers, a really seasoned media expert, predicted that by 2030, 80% of media planning and buying will be undertaken without any human intervention, which tells you just how fast this industry is changing, and that's really only 6 years away. So what has the study revealed? It's revealed that nearly 7 in 10 brands are experimenting with genAI, which is really promising. And therefore, we're seeing some really solid initial uptake by brands. However, by far the biggest use case to use genAI is for content creation and generation. So 86% of leaders told us that is the core use case that they're using it for. The next closest was insights generation at 43%. So really, when we look at that and we look at where the market's going, brands that will win in the space are the ones that are going beyond what I would term the more basic use cases for adoption. So that's my personal perspective, but keen to hear your thoughts as well, Billy, given that you work in this space as well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, beyond content creation is low-hanging fruit, right? You don't really need rich amounts of data. Google has done the hard lifting for you. I think you'll see an explosion in AI co-pilots, so things supporting marketing users. So at Amperity, we know SQL is not a common skill set for businesses or business leaders. So how do you democratize and bring that capability to ask the data questions without needing SQL? Just like you ask Google a question, how can you democratize that to an application? So I think you're going to see a rise of co-pilots in every space, in every application. Okay, so I'm keen to understand from your perspective, Joe, how is this changing the briefs you are seeing from brands in this space? Are you seeing a lot of specialist roles starting to come to market around requirements for AI experience?
The answer is no. It's pretty interesting. We haven't really seen a huge shift at all. I think like the most common requirement we would get would be around having Power BI, which is used from a data and analytics perspective. We know, as the studies highlighted, that organizations are experimenting with genAI, mostly around that content and that creation piece. So I guess it's actually pretty surprising that, for those roles that are heavily content related, and we've actually had quite a lot over the last sort of 12 or so months, that there hasn't been that link to have, experience on platforms such as ChatGPT, which we absolutely know candidates, are using, and they share that with us. I think obviously as the space evolves, as businesses adopt more GenAI technology and embed it into their way of working, I suspect we will start seeing specific skills and AI platform experience in the future. No different to having platform experience for CRM and eCommerce, tools. So I absolutely think that will be the way the future moves towards.
Yeah, super interesting. It's surprising you haven't seen it yet, but it will come. And in particular, the amount of support it's helping people write their resumes. But
absolutely, and cover letters.
Let's jump into the next one. Teresa, over to you. If you think about brands that are leading in the GenAI space, who particularly comes to mind?
Sure. So globally, we're seeing a number of early adopters. And I think Coca-Cola is a good example. They hired a head of GenAI about 18 months ago, I believe, and they've been consistently experimenting over the past 18 or so months. They've leveraged it for product development, right through to leveraging GenAI for campaign activation, but not just internally. They're empowering their customers with the ability to create UGC through the use of GenAI. So as you can see, this example goes well beyond that kind of internal use for content generation. So I think they're a really good example. Go look at what Mercedes are doing as well. They're also a really great example of what they're doing in the GenAI space. I think the final point I'll make, though, on GenAI is that any brand that's looking to adopt it really needs to be thinking about governance and guardrails alongside of really thinking about the opportunity to ensure that it's harnessed in the right way to manage brand reputation and to ensure ethical use from an organizational point of view and to mitigate risks. So I know they're less interesting topics when it comes to GenAI, but they're actually fundamentally important.
Oh, couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. Yeah, it's governance and control is very important around the data you're giving it in particular.
That's right.
Thank you, T. All right, we're going to jump into theme 5. And I want to welcome Maya to the virtual couch. Maya, how you doing?
Hey, Billy, how are you?
Good, thank you. We're going to talk all things talent. So much of the study points back to capability gaps and challenges, the need for upskilling and the importance of talent. So I'm going to turn the tables now and ask you a few questions on these topics. So firstly, give me a bit of a snapshot on where the market is overall and what you are seeing that is challenging brands in the talent acquisition space.
Yeah, absolutely. So 6 months into the year, and what we're seeing is that it's an employer market, but definitely a competitive one, as a lot of companies are vying for the same top talent, but within a market that's experiencing a skill shortage in certain pockets of digital and e-commerce. So let me give you a little bit of an example of what I mean. So on Seek at the moment, there's 194 performance marketing roles being advertised, and there's 489 CRM roles being advertised between the salary of 120 and 150,000. So what that's telling me is that we're all heading in the same direction regarding digital performance and CRM, but organizations have a different view on what salary needs to be paid in order to attract the right talent. And we all know that, there's kind of 4 key deciding factors for candidates when it comes down to selecting their employer. So number 1, it's always around who is paying the best salary package and what's included in that. Number 2 is really around the EVP of the organisation. What do they stand by? Number 3, it's around their hybrid working policy. And the 4th one, which has definitely become a lot more common, is what is the career development plan that is being offered by that organisation for me to be successful. But ultimately, finding talent within the desired salary banding is the biggest challenge we're facing in recruitment when we're partnering with clients and candidates. And interestingly, it resonated with 64% of those surveyed.
Well, it is becoming more of an employer-driven market, but specialized talent is still hard to come by. So brands need to start thinking about their EVP, so employee value proposition, and part of that is working from home. What did you find interesting about the working from home trends and on the training and development front?
Yeah, so working from home is an interesting concept that continues to evolve as time goes on, especially for those businesses that are experiencing the economic pinch harder than others. From a recruitment perspective, probably for the last year or a little bit more than a year, we've seen most businesses change their mandate to a minimum of 3 to 4 days in the office, and that was validated in the report once again. For some employees, it definitely creates friction and, of course, a loss of talent. However, in most cases, I'd say 9 out of 10, moving to 4 days has been a natural progression that has been led by the leadership team to drive culture, collaboration, new working rhythms, and ultimately to drive productivity for an organisation. But of course, many organisations are still trying to find what is the perfect balance, as everyone's different. But interestingly, when reading the report, 90% of those surveyed used the on-the-go learning over other modes of learning. So, what that's telling me is that we all still believe in the importance of osmosis, the incidental water cooler chats, the live collaborations, the on-the-go feedback. Hey, let's get a coffee and brainstorm this idea. So I think that is still a fundamental L&D tool that we are all using day to day.
I mean, who doesn't love a water cooler conversation? And if someone said to me, 5 years ago, I could work a day from home a week full time and go back into the office 4 days a week, I'd take it. No questions asked. So, I mean, great insights. And yeah, going back to the office is great in my industry. I personally love it. So thank you. Appreciate all your insights there, Maya. Great to have you. Okay, so we're going to pivot now into theme 6. Around e-commerce. So I want to welcome Teresa back to the couch. Thank you. So the e-commerce part of the study was expanded this year to delve deeper into an array of topics. And there is so much here for brands operating in the e-commerce space. So Teresa, what are you seeing and what were some of the interesting findings around the e-commerce front?
They say save the best till last, don't they, Billy? And it's a great e-commerce section, so definitely check it out. So I'm going to cover off 3 key findings because we don't have time to cover off all of them. But so the first I'm going to talk about is channel proliferation. So if we think back kind of 10 years ago, we had nowhere near as many channels to activate as we have today. These days, brands are juggling their e-comm presence across their own site. They might have a presence in marketplaces and aggregators. They might be leveraging quick commerce platforms. They might be utilizing social commerce. They might also be experimenting with conversational commerce, right? So I've just touched on 5 or 6 different channels. So what we sought to do this year is determine how many channels are brands actually activating across as part of their e-comm strategy. And the study found that on average, brands are leveraging 2.3 channels to reach their audience and trade in the e-comm space. But when we look at it from a retailer perspective, that rises to 2.4. And when we look at it from a kind of FMCG, manufacturing, CPG perspective, that rises again to nearly 2.5. Now, that might not sound like too many, but we class marketplaces as a channel. We class quick commerce platforms as a channel. So let's say you're an FMCG brand, you might be activating across a couple of marketplaces. You might have a presence across a couple of quick commerce platforms. So all of a sudden, you're activating and trading across 5, 6, 7 platforms in market, which creates a host of challenges for brands across the content space, delivering continuity and consistency in the brand experience, etc., etc. And that's only going to continue to grow, because what the study has found is that brands are planning to invest more moving ahead in new channels from an experimentation perspective. In particular, social commerce and conversational commerce were key channels that were highlighted in the report as those that were most likely that brands would experiment with in the year ahead. So that's a really, really big finding. The second finding is related to profitability. So in this year's study, we have seen the importance being placed on profitability really skyrocket. It came in as the third biggest priority for e-commerce teams this year, up from 8th in 2023. So now that might come as a little surprise. Brands are turning from scale to profitability against a backdrop of rising cost. So that was the second big finding from the study. And then the final finding that I want to touch on is e-commerce maturity. So the study has shown us that whilst brands have accelerated investment and capability build, the vast majority of brands understand that to be a market leader, there is still a lot of work to do, with more than 7 in 10 brands believing that their maturity is satisfactory, low or very low in the e-commerce space. Now, when we look ahead to kind of the next 6-7 years, we know that by 2033, I can't count, it's about 9 years away. We know by 2033 that it's anticipated that nearly 1 in every 3 retail sales will be online. And therefore, that means as brands, we need to start building capability now. So they're the 3 key findings I wanted to touch on.
Yeah. Yeah. Profitability is in every industry right now, right? Quantity over quality, quality over quantity. So
that's right.
Super
exactly.
insightful. So Teresa, you talk about maturity and how brands compare to global leaders. Who are some of the global leaders that are head and shoulders above the pack in this space?
Yeah, so if we think about kind of global e-com leaders, so in the retail space, I think you can't go past brands like Walmart. They're a really good one to look up to. It's an obvious one, but as a brand, they have been evolving rapidly because they've had to in order to retain their market share. So in the US, when we look at the US market, Amazon is a very, very dominant online player, very different to what we see here. And so they have everything to lose as an organization. So, they've been rapidly expanding out their marketplace proposition. They've been driving innovation in demand generation, through to deploying initiatives like creator affiliate programs, scaling their live shopping proposition. And so really, at its core, their investment and focus is consistent. And that's why I would say they're a leader in this space. They understand where the market's going and they're really focused on evolving with it. In the FMCG and CPG space, you can't go past L'Oreal, which is why it's so great that we have Ryan with us here today for a number of reasons. But one of the key reasons I think they're doing so well is that from a content perspective, and I know this sounds really basic, but they really think about platform and shopper experience as opposed to content compliance. They also know that their future really lies beyond traditional channels and their online stores. So, they're really diversifying their channel strategy, deploying and activating in social commerce, building out their D2C presence, activating through marketplaces. And so, I think they're really a leader in this space to look to, which is a lovely segue for me to welcome Ryan to the virtual couch. Thank you, Billy. You're probably happy that I've taken over for a moment. So Ryan, welcome. We're so excited that you could join us today to share some of your wisdom in the e-commerce space. Obviously, I've just talked about channel proliferation, and it's really challenging brands to think differently about managing e-commerce. How are you thinking about that at L'Oreal? And what are some of the practical challenges you believe brands need to work through to manage their presence across the digital shelf?
Yeah, well, first of all, I just wanted to say thanks, Teresa, and to the wider team for having me on. Obviously, you did. There was a couple of comments there that I'll definitely probably break down into a little bit more detail, but great question. I think for us, we're here really to build. How do we build a strong presence across our digital shelf? And really, I think that starts with our consumer. Identifying the platforms that we're winning, not only within the category, but also the platforms that they engage with. But also we also have to have that foresight as well, and be able to quickly adapt to the new channels, technologies, and consumer behaviors, that changing landscape. So I know you touched on one or two there, but I guess for us, we do know that the consumers are changing the way they shop. So the point about before, Amazon, recent studies are showing that when a person considers buying a product, 60% of them start their journey on Amazon. And I think similarly with that, we've got this rise of social commerce. So particularly with the Gen Zs, what we've seen is that 60% of Gen Zs are now being influenced through social media. So when it comes to buying a product, how do you play in those platforms where your audience is also understanding? And then I think the last one really that's an interesting insight is just this shift in retailers and the way that you play. Retailers have always historically been a conversion channel for brands like us, but now they're becoming more of this upper funnel discovery piece where they've started to unlock things like retailer media, and just another little snippet that, you know, now 1 in 3 people are now discovering brands this way through the way that you can advertise on these retailer platforms. So definitely some things there. And I think probably building on that, it's not just about going and winning with the winners and everything else. It's really about how you build those relationships and those partnerships with those players as well. So that in brand consistency and integrity that you touched on is so important to L'Oreal. For us, it's about consistent brand messaging, ensuring that it's a similar brand experience across all those touch points, ensuring that our product information, visuals, and key brand core medical messaging for us is equally important. So that consistency is really key.
I think there's so many valuable points there for the audience, Ryan, whether it's that message of, you know, the ever evolving customer. It's not, you can't stand still as a brand in the e-commerce space. But equally, you know, the interesting shift that has occurred around, you know, customer platforms or supermarket platforms not just being about conversion these days anymore. It's about where does building a brand start and stop versus where does conversion start and stop. It's not easy to determine that anymore within the digital space, right? And so you need to be thinking more broadly around how you're showing up on that digital shelf to achieve both objectives, both brand and conversion.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's great. So my second question to you is, e-commerce in many businesses still isn't seen as an integral part of how the organisation engages the market. How do leaders and teams navigate challenges around gaining buy-in, building belief about the opportunity that e-commerce affords?
Yeah, again, thanks for the question. I think for us, and I think in the wider industry, I think e-commerce is still really siloed and really considered as a separate channel, as opposed to being a real core part of the go-to-market strategy. I think when it comes to e-commerce, we shouldn't be thinking it as a technology. We should be really thinking about it as a growth strategy. And I think within every brand, it should really be a frame. We should build that into the frame in terms of those strategic goals. So for brands, particularly, is it about reaching new consumers, or is it really about increasing revenue? I think those overall objectives, eComm taps into that. So whether it's wallet size or increasing lifetime value, it's really about how e-commerce can directly support those. And I think coming back to it, like, we have to start really at the beautiful thing is that we've got this wealth of data and trends and what we can see online. We've got an amazing, probably no surprises, but we've got this amazing consumer market insight team. And really for us, we're an extremely data-driven organization. And what we do know is that the pace of growth within eComm, I know you mentioned it before, but in terms of weight of business, we see that overtaking bricks and mortar by 2030. So that's going to go over parity. And I think you have to be able to tap into that growth. And then secondly, just the way that the consumer landscape is moving. We now know that 80% of transactions, 80% of the time, one transaction is, so a consumer has made at least one transaction online. So out of all the transactions, 80% of it We know at least one of those has been maintained online in the last month alone. So that real shift in terms of the way that it's informing and influencing that online behavior is also a way that we try to tap into it. And I think lastly, customer centricity. I think eComm for us and wider businesses, having that richness of data, being able to send hyper-personalized experiences, being able to hyper-personalize our communications. You can only you get that through eCommerce, like the wealth of data that we're able to get. And then how does that then transform and translate to those other channels, I think is equally important. So it really helps us stay ahead of our competition, knowing our consumer better than anyone else.
So I think there's some really good stuff in there, Ryan, around the growth strategy piece. So if you know, growth strategy normally sits at an enterprise level, and the more likely it sits as part of the enterprise strategy, the more likely it is going to be integrated as part of core business. But equally, you know, you've touched on this digital influence piece, which I think we should all be thinking about as much as we're thinking about eComm sales, right? At the end of the day, our eComm presence and how we show up on the digital shelf does as much to influence in store as it does online. So some really great points there. Thank you so much, Ryan, for joining us. So I'm now going to hand back over to Billy, who'll take us away with the Q&A section.
Awesome. Thank you, T. And thanks, Ryan. Super insightful, mate. Great to hear your perspective. All right, I'm going to ask the first question. We've got a wealth of questions here about my hats. Guys, I'm not going to answer those. But what I will ask is one directed at maybe Dina. Maybe, Dina, you can help us with this one. But it asks...
we might get everyone back on video, Billy.
Yeah, jump back in, team. Any insights for those leading in the CX space? Do loyalty programs play a key role or not seen as a big priority for marketers to invest in today? I mean, I have my perspective, but I'd love to hear yours.
Sure. I think it comes back to what loyalty means for you in the business and also for your customers. So I think traditionally people still see loyalty programs as shop and then get a discount. And I know for us that doesn't, it's not true loyalty. When you think about it as a customer, that doesn't really keep us loyal. So if you go back to sort of the beginning of, you know, what does loyalty mean for the customer? Is it personalized experiences? Is it the service that they get from your store? How does that then tie back to the type of brand that you offer? So obviously, you know, it's a premium product and an elevated service is expected. But what is that service then specifically for you based on what you purchase within the business and then keeping you moving into different brackets versus, you know, a different business that maybe is in the lower end of the market? What does loyalty mean for them? That might not still be about discounts, but about other things that provide value for them, be it, you know, content, an additional way of doing things. So I think it's important, but it's redefined into what it needs to be. So for me, the investment needs to happen. But just redefine what it means for your customers. Correct.
In a world where first-party data is king, loyalty is a great mechanism to collect and use that data, but without a clear proposition, it kind of falls flat on its feet. And especially when we talk about profitability, like you said about just incentivizing for discounts. So Ryan, I have a question for you, mate. You mentioned that e-commerce will take over bricks and mortar. Were you referring to L'Oreal or the market generally when you mentioned around 2030?
Yeah, no, definitely the market generally. I think we know now that there's this, you know, this ROPO effect of research online, purchase offline, and vice versa. So we know that, you know, 60% of digital is driving the offline component at the moment. I guess that doesn't translate because, you know, I see an ad online and I go into store and purchase something. It's really, I guess, that direct correlation with eComm will be by 2030, by all reports. It should be, you know, hitting over parity for the first time.
The challenge has always been attribution, right? To
Absolutely.
be able to align the sale. And I think that's the biggest thing I've seen with physical and digital retailers. So yeah, I think you're right there.
And I might just jump in there, Billy. One of the things we tested in the report this year is how are brands measuring eComm performance? And we tested that kind of research online buy and store. What portion of brands are using that as a metric, particularly in the, you know, in spaces like retail? And it's pretty low. And I think this is one of the challenges because ultimately it impacts how much focus is placed on e-commerce, how much investment is placed on e-commerce, because we're effectively under measuring, trying to think of a better word, under attributing is the word I mean.
Correct.
Under attributing the true value of the investment that we're currently making.
Interesting. Well, here's another one for around training and development. Whoever wants to take this one, but T may be good for you. What does the survey say about training and development? What's being offered by organizations? And if there's a gap with what people want and expect versus what's given?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we didn't tease out what people want, but we did definitely tease out what people, the modes of training and development and learning. So on average, and it's a big report, so if I get the stat completely wrong, somebody can tell me after, but on average, brands are using about 3.8 different modes to train their teams, right? So Maya touched on the job learning. That is very, very dominant within the study. 90% of brands said they are using on-the-job learning, but they're normally using it with another mode or other modes of learning. The second highest was lunch and learn type activities, and that was around 55%. So that's what we found from the study. But I think the other thing that I would touch on briefly is that what we found from the study, when we asked teams, how are they thinking about learning and development? Only 1/3 said that they have a departmental-wide capability plan and development plan.
Yep.
So historically, if we think about development, we would develop people by having individual reviews and developing development plans. And there was never a horizontal approach to thinking about, well, what capabilities are we trying to build across the team? And therefore, how are we horizontally going to train the team in the core areas that everyone needs to better understand? And then how do we supplement with individual learning, right? So the study is telling us that effectively 2/3 of brands still aren't thinking like that, which I think is problematic, because in a world that is changing so rapidly, we have to think horizontally and have a really deliberate plan to reorient the skills that exist within our functions. So, you know, and then the final thing I'll say on training development, I personally think the market's gone too far in individual online learning. It's a way of creating scalable courses and programs that allow providers to make a lot of money. But what we see in a lot of the programs that we run internally is actually when you have groups of people together and they're grappling with the learning together and they're talking about what that means for their organization, teams can accelerate and embed the learning so much faster than if we're all learning online and not actually talking about what that means for us as an organization. So I hope that I've answered that question in a few different bits of
thoroughly. I think you did. May, I have a question for you. I have recently heard of organizations downsizing their office space and utilizing working from home as a way to save on overhead, such as rent. Have you seen this across the wider business demographic?
In short, no. So no, we haven't seen that. I think for smaller businesses or startups, yes, absolutely, because they're trying to drive revenue streams and trying to get a bit of traction on the ground. But actually, we've seen the opposite. We're actually seeing so many businesses invest in how do we get people back in the office? What do we do from a culture perspective? You know, how do we build A-class office environments to get that excitement back? So not commonly, but, you know, of course, for smaller businesses where, you know, that overhead is a significant cost to the P&L, of course, but, you know, generally speaking, no.
Yeah. If you guys aren't going to the office, it's hard to pay the rent, right? So, okay, so I've got one last question and I think we're going to wrap it up. So given marTech utilization is generally low and challenges around skill gaps arise, where are brands looking to spend more or less of their marketing budgets?
Who are you asking?
I'm asking the room. There's Brady Bunch faces I see on my screen right now.
Well, I might just start by saying that despite the fact we have low utilization, the study has not found a significant decline in the investment that is being made in marTech. There is a slight decline, but it's not substantial. So I'll probably preface people's opinions with saying what the kind of study has found in the allocation of investment space.
Yep. Yeah, what I found is more executive teams and more boards bullish around getting better results with the same dollar. So paid media is the perfect example, right? If you don't have a strategy to improve your results, you probably shouldn't be spending the money. So that's a wrap, T. That's the Q&A. That's all questions done and dusted. This will be recorded and available post-webinar for those asking as well. I'm going to hand it back over to you, Teresa.
Fantastic, Billy. Well, thank you everyone for joining. We hope you got a lot out of today's session. A big thanks once again to our contributors, our panelists and our sponsors and everyone who has attended. Look out for a copy of the report, which should hit your inbox today. And if you want to connect with myself, Maya, Joe, our details are on the screen. We would love to hear any feedback that you have, answer any other questions that you have. And thank you for all the thumbs up and the claps and the love hearts. It looks like everyone's enjoyed attending today's session. Thank you very much and bye for now.